The world is changing. There's a growing recognition that we need more women and people of color or different religions or orientations in management and decision-making positions. We've got forces like globalization and internationalization, along with increased migration across borders. There's a drive to provide access to the differently abled, an increasing acceptance of people whose gender is non-binary, along with an acceptance of a range of sexual orientations. These are some of the trends and issues that are shaping the world we live in today. But a hard look at academia, particularly in the Western world, continues to show a blindingly white landscape of men as professors, leaders, and consequently, role models. It's changing, fortunately. We need look no further than here at NTNU, which currently has its first ever female rector, but there's a lot to be done. NTNU's motto is knowledge for a better world, but for the university to play a vital role in society and fulfill its mission in delivering research that makes a difference, it needs to reflect our society in all its diversity in the real world as it is today. Welcome to Science Conversations. I'm Nancy Basilchuk, and today we're going to look at the issues surrounding gender equality and diversity at the university. We know that societies are becoming increasingly diverse. So what does that mean for the university and for early career academics who play an incredibly important role in changing paradigms? I have with me three very knowledgeable individuals who will share their ideas on these important issues. So Siri, let's jump right in.
Yeah.
You're a professor and head of the Center for Gender Research in the university's Department of Interdisciplinary Studies of Culture. Can you give our audience a little description of where the university is now when it comes to gender inclusion and overall diversity? Are we doing a good job?
Well, yes, we're doing a good job, but there are still things to do. I think if one should describe the situation, a very common way to report on diversity and inclusion is by counting representation of different social categories. The groups we, for either political or organizational reasons, have chosen to sort people into. And for NTNU, we have the numbers of those registered as men or women and based on citizenship. So we know something about gender balance in terms of the distribution of men and women and international background. And if we look at the number on aggregated level for NTNU, there's a clear gender pattern. Men constitutes the clear majority of professors. Approximately 75% of all NTNU professors are men. And this is despite the fact that there has, in general, been even representation of men and women on PhD level, on the entry point to academic careers since the early 2000s. And if we look to international diversity as the other dimension that we can count, Norwegian citizens are clear majority in permanent positions. Almost 80% of all professors are Norwegian citizens, so 75% of associate professors. But if we look on postdoc level, it's a different picture. 65% of all postdoc researchers at NTNU are non-Norwegian citizens. So there's something going on here. These numbers, they indicate some patterns. However, these aggregated numbers doesn't tell the whole story. If you look into variations, and that's what I've been doing with colleagues, look into how does it look like on department level, on research group level, on faculty level, we find huge variations. So it's not always the case that it makes sense to look at aggregated level to understand what's going on behind the numbers, what's causing these patterns. And that's what I've been mainly interested in my research, is to finding out all the stuff that numbers can't tell. And I think that's something we should also really talk about if we should describe the situation at our university regarding inclusion and diversity. I think, for instance, we know numbers tell that the number of women professors are increasing. In 2000, I think it was 13%, and then a decade later, 20, and then predictions or calculations by researchers at NIFU tell us that by 2026 we'll reach the target of 37% women professors. So there is change going on, but then I think it's important we need to look into what does it take for those women to succeed in becoming professors. Perhaps there's an unfair burden behind these nice numbers, and we need to talk about how sexism, racism, ableism works in our system, in how we interact, and talk about uneven distribution of privilege, talk about how power works in academia.
Those are all really good.
Yeah, I think that's key to come further, and we still have a long way to go.
Right, and I think we'll talk about exactly those issues today. In fact, Anniken, you are an associate professor and you're ombudsperson for gender equality and diversity at the Faculty of Information and Technology and Electrical Engineering. And you actually have, I think, a very interesting perspective on this because you are in an academic in a very traditionally male-dominated field, engineering, and you've also been, as I understand it, in a leadership role where you had responsibility for hiring, for example. Can you talk a little bit about how did that work for you? How has that experience affected you?
Yeah, I was when I grew up, I was always interested in cars and things like more boys were working with. So it was natural for me to choose an engineering career. So I worked with men mostly and been educated together with men almost all my life. I guess my father was wishing for a boy or something like that. I have various experiences by being in a male-dominant milieu. Most of them are positive, but I've always felt a responsibility to prove myself as good or extra good pertaining to my colleagues. So that has been challenging. And I have small stories on cases where I felt that, okay, my knowledge was talked down, but it's not important. I think that when you work in a milieu, you adapt to it and you learn your tricks to survive in a good matter. And I think that I've learned a lot in my own development. And I saw that when I became head of department, it put me into a specific position where I could also influence myself, for example, in the hiring processes, etc. And I would say that that was a very nice experience.
And did you feel that you were able to hire more women or hire more diverse?
Yes, and that is why I feel that it's so important that management are really working behind everything that we do and has an extra responsibility into this. Because when you sit in a hiring process, it's there are so many aspects associated with each individual, but when you are in a management position, you can choose and you can also weigh a bit what you want to say is extra beneficial in this position. So I think you play an important role.
Yeah, and I think it's very much about the recruitment. But could you say something from your experience? Where is the crucial point? Is it the committee that you put down to evaluate the academic capabilities of the candidates, or is it the hiring committee, or is it the head of department? Where did you put in your effort?
I think it's the sum of all of these things. I think that you have to work on different instances or levels. You need to educate, and we are doing a lot of that now in the NTNU system, to educate employees, educate leadership. But in the final end, when you employ something, you can weigh and have some benefits on this and that, and you can make a selection process, and of course you can influence the end result of that, as I see it.
Because my experience is that when you have the ranking by the committee, there has to be very strong arguments and heavy discussions to change the order of candidates. So there's a lot of things going on in the assessment process. But so I was thinking of whether or not you saw that as from the perspective of head of department.
I think that when you weigh in a lot of their papers, etc., they are ranked list, and then you call people in for interviews, and then there will be things that are talked about in interviews, and then you can see something from a different perspective. So of course in the end you can choose, and I'm sure that a lot of the things that we weigh in our dialogues is also biased. So,
do you find this?
Yeah, I was thinking about the research because there's also been a lot of research into these hiring processes, as they are, of course, crucial in changing who's holding which positions in the and we know that gender bias is at work in different ways in this process, both in these assessment processes, but also in terms of how candidates choose or not choose to apply for what kind. So there's levels here. So we know, for instance, if you announce a position and allows more time, you will have more women applicants. If you have a shorter list of requirements, you will have more like mandatory requirements. You'll have more women applicants compared to when you put the 7 bullet point list. So there are a lot of systematic research into how you could shape, like bringing a more diverse group of researchers into the process, and then on each step.
Because if I look at my own experience from sitting in assessment committees, both at NTNU and external, what we try to do, because everyone is, of course, trying to be inclusive, give everyone a fair chance and all of those things. But we tend to look very much about the hard facts, even if it's not about the ranking of the journal you are publishing in, for instance. Try to balance the different things. It's still about whether or not you fulfill some criteria that we have both consciously written about, which has been written about in the requirements and so on, but also the thing we bring in as a committee member, assessment member. So I was thinking when you said about the number of PhD candidates and the balance there, do we know anything about who is publishing more, male or females, in the early career period?
I don't have like numbers on early career. I don't know, but what we know on later, like on faculty level, is the myth. It's a myth that women publish less than men. They don't. Researcher, or it's depending more on the type of position you hold, like how much teaching duties and how much research time and so on. But we know that, for instance, like you say, you bring something into the assessment that you have sort of articulated as criteria, but then you also bring a lot of these more subjective interpretations. And for instance, we know, as like experiments that has been conducted by assessing CVs of early career scholars.
Yeah.
Yeah, you all heard of it, probably.
No, I haven't.
Like if you see a list of publications and they're all joint publications, there's a tendency, I'm not saying that it's happening in every case, but there's a tendency that, for instance, fake application for a postdoc will be interpreted as a networker, as well-positioned in the field, as sort of a collaborator, whereas the woman would be interpreted as maybe too dependent on other, maybe not too. So, and that these are like these, the list is exactly the same, the name changes, and then you have these unconscious biases influencing still how we interpret these objectively equal merits.
But that raises the question, because I think we are talking a lot to early career researchers now.
Yes, exactly.
And for every step you have to be evaluated by assessment committee. And I have this experience because in medicine you have a very clear definition. For instance, to become a professor, it's about having at least 15 publications. It's about having supervised a PhD candidate the whole way through. things like that, but other areas does not have these kind of criteria. What's your opinion? Should it be more like in medicine, setting a kind of a measurable standard for it, or should it be more the open one, that this is whether or not it's an international acknowledged level?
Anniken, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that I prefer that we have rules and regulations, and that you can see from a list that these are the criteria. But what I see as a nice development is that the criteria has changed. And they shouldn't change too often, but now they change. So now it's not just the number of publications. It's also if you have pedagogic, if you have leadership training. So I think that these are a development that will be beneficial to many groups because you have a broader perspective on the selection process. So
I think so too, that it's good to have these clear criteria because it's possible to navigate towards them, but then also it puts responsibility on leader. It's like this, who gets access to these meriting tasks, who gets to do the work needed to do all this, like check all the marks you need to check to move to the next level. So there's a lot of informal power still in who's allowed to sort of pursue the track. It's not only, but as an individual, you can see what it takes formally and then make claims or.
Anniken?
But it's interesting, I talked about the publications. That is one of the merits of becoming a professor or whatever. And you talked about if it was a man, then they were networking, and if you're a woman, maybe you are dependent on others. I also have seen a development from going from the old university college into the NTNU. When you was at the university college, you had to do the main job yourself, maybe, not that big networks. So you wrote, you did the research, you did everything from A to B to C yourself. Now the networking part is more important, so you also generate more applications, more papers, whatever, together with others. And that is one of the things I noted that was one of the tricks I would say to PhDs, is that they should do networking. It's so important. It's not just about being smart and merits, but it's also nice to work with others, and I think it benefits the research.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I want to actually introduce you.
Yeah, that's true.
You jumped the gun.
Yeah, I did.
So you're Aslak. Now, you're a professor in behavioral sciences and medicine and health service research at the Department of Public Health and Nursing here. And you look at patient perspectives and how patients experience the complete package of healthcare services they use. So I don't know that we're talking so much about early career, so I don't know if we want to jump into some of the biases that maybe they experience or so forth. But I did want to talk a little bit about how the larger field of medical research in particular has really been focused on men. Is it changing? And how does that affect early career researchers? Do they need to think more broadly when they create their research projects?
So is it changing? It's at least something that's discussed on the what's called in Norwegian Feministhuset here in town. On the wall where they put up some of the females who have done made a kind of an impression.
Right.
They put on the first female professor in women's health, which is she works at my department, Berit Skei, and of course champions like her has been able to kind of turn the discussion more towards these kind of issues like equality, gender biases, and so on. So in the field in general, it has of course changed. But what I think is even it's the kind of the hidden barriers you talked about, the non-communicated or the things that we don't talk about explicitly. But when we talk about academia.
Yeah, good.
Academia. I think one of the strongest selectors is our bias towards what's good research and not. and how we interpret that. So even if we are more and more aware of sexist, racist biases or racism biases, it's still, when it comes down to it, people have to argue for what they, for whether or not to put a certain person into a position or ranking it first in terms of kind of scientific argument, not scientific argument as such, but based on scientific merits. And what you judge to be of good science, what you judge to be a good science, I think that's a very strong predictor for the patterns we see. And I think a lot of people put, for instance, gender issues into what's good science. It's easy to think about a few years back where we had this TV program on gender studies, and no, it just didn't look like you heard about it.
No, I haven't seen it.
It's probably soon, 5 to 10 years ago. But that was a huge discussion about whether or not they did proper research or not.
Yeah.
I was not going to open that, but it's an example of discussions which sometimes reach the public area, but which goes on every day, I think, in academia. Do I think that you do good research, or do you do good research, or do I think that my way of doing it is the best one? And the answer is, I guess,
your way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or the highway.
Yeah.
But that's one of the power structures and types of how privileging works in academic systems that I think we should discuss. These norms for what's considered to be good or excellent research or not, because that's, if you think about it, and if you do research the way I do research, it's criticized for those who do science in the more positivistic way, but if you are a sociologist, you would more often perceive the world as a construct, as something that can be always negotiated, that includes the practices of research, of doing research and science. So that's also part of what I think it's important to sort of open up these, and who sets the standards, and who are allowed to decide these criteria for good science, good knowledge, etc.
But maybe we should discuss a bit about that, because we talk to the PhDs mainly here. And
An early career.
An early career. And a PhD is also an educational journey. So it's not just about the number of
publications.
Yeah, it is more about learning ethics, deliver high quality papers, not a number of papers, of course, and following a plan, and do an educational journey. So what do you think about that when we compare it? Because later on you start as a researcher, there are other elements into the career development.
Yeah, but it comes to the assessment committees, because you'd finish your PhD and you're going to apply for become an associate professor, and then you are assessed. And then there are some criteria in the area of medicine, for instance, health sciences. It's about, of course, having a PhD, which is across everything, but you establish standards on what you expect people to have done, and what kind of, and you compete with others. That's also very important. And these criteria are very much all of it. It's not about counting the number of publications. I think most people will agree that this is not what you do. It still counts. So it's because it's a criteria, a show, but not a criteria. It's a sign of being able to somehow get your research
share
out
your
there,
research,
share your research,
get the news out. Yeah.
So even if you don't count it and you make an evaluation of the quality, and that's well, at least in the committees I've been, it's always the case that we consider the quality. It's still something that it's easier to assess the quality of if you have 10 papers than if it's 3 papers. Because it says something about the breadth and so on. So no matter what, even if you don't have a strict criteria about the numbers, it still has an influence on it. So a very important message for those who want to pursue a career in academia academia, is to see that there are these kind of barriers. So publications, number of publications, even if it's not directly counted, it still matters. The type of research you do, if you are coming as a constructivist and applying for a position at the medical faculty, that will be challenging. If you want to do cross-disciplinary collaboration, which we encourage a lot, you need to be aware that the position or the tradition you are coming from might not automatically match the area of the person, for instance, running the project or being head of the project. And these are factors which I think is, I'll make it as a claim. I think this is more strongly influencing the selection process than gender.
Oh, that's quite a claim. Annika, you first,
I think
and then
you have partly right. I do not agree on everything, but I think it's important to think about the publications because they are important. They are on your CV. But I'm happy that we now try to go in a direction where we value several things. But also when it comes to publications, everyone knows it's differences between them. It's differences between the venues. It's differences between the journals. So a paper is not a paper for the PhDs, and it's so some are high quality. And I read somewhere that the Nobel Prize winners they looked for quality and not quantity in publications, and I think that is also important to think about when you do your PhD.
Yeah.
Sienni?
Yeah, I of course, nothing of what you say is wrong, and I think it's yes, these rules we agreed on, they are also based on these countable results, like number of publications, or in some disciplines, the types of journal. Like there's this hierarchy of channels that indicates whether you were sort of able to pass some threshold, and that's fine, and it's good for these young researchers to be aware that yes, there are some like entry thresholds. Still, I think, going back to what Anniken said about this education and what you actually do in pursuing this PhD, there's so much going on in academia that is not said out or not articulated. So we tend to focus on sort of the content of what, like we teach theories, we teach methods, we make early career researchers very well aware that we can't save you, you have to produce this number of articles, it's not on me. So we do all this, but what we don't do is to articulate all the other stuff. Like Anniken said something about networking. I think that's also something we are articulating. But there's this, the only way as a early career researcher, you have to sort of figure out how things work in your discipline, in your field, is by observing. Like, what are these people who succeeded doing? And that's a super strong force in reproducing not always the things we want to reproduce, but practices that are unhealthy for many reasons, and also excluding people who don't sort of embody the same way of being as those who, and there's a lot of myths about what it takes. So that's also, I've been interviewing so many young researchers, and there's this gap between the idea they have about what it takes to become a professor. It's like many of the young researchers I've interviewed, they say that they really want to do research, but they're not sure if they want to live the life you have to live as a professor. It's like, and interviewing then established professors, the narrative is completely different. It's like a flexible job where I can juggle, follow my interests, and it's a different narrative.
Into like this,
but that's not communicate. Like my impression is that there's a gap here in what we communicate, like focusing on this number of papers and maybe not telling the story of how nice it was to actually be able to pursue different interests, to travel, to do stuff in life that you're privileged to be able to do.
Anniken, you want to say something?
I think it's important to have guiding principles so people can do some checkups and also achieve a career. I'm more focused on not the number of papers. I think that being in academia is much more than just generating papers and doing that. I think it's important to have experience from several areas: leadership, teaching in classes. We are an educational place, so I think it's good, and I don't think that professorships should come easy either. It should take some time to mature into it. So I think it's important for PhDs to build a career, and also remember that it takes time for most people. I don't know the square time before people become professors in general, but that
On
is
average, it takes 12 years in Norwegian setting.
yeah.
from
So that
finalizing a
that
PhD
is
to-
something about the expectancy also, but
But what about for people who are not white? No offense, white men.
Yeah.
You earlier, either in our conversation previously or you alluded to it when you were talking earlier, there are these myths, for example, that women are stop becoming professors or turn away from the professor career track because of childbearing. What are the roadblocks that face people who are not white men, people who are from a different country that maybe is very much underrepresented at NTNU, or women, or people of different races? Do you have any experience or findings on that?
There's some research into this in a Norwegian setting, but I would say that one of the hugest roadblocks, I would say, is that we don't really discuss, for instance, racism. And so we have, I've interviewed, NTNU have chosen the category international researchers. That's what we can register, citizenship. That's what we have facts about. But and I and a group of colleagues did a small study to map the experiences of this group of researchers coming to NTNU and establishing themselves here. And many of them, all of them, reported experiences with being treated differently or not feeling seen in the same way. But there's a lack of discussion about this, and it's not addressed openly, so we wrap it into either discussions about language or cultural differences or national background. But very often we see, so, and statistics show that, like, if you are, and then again, statistics are made based on national origin very often, so, but there's like the likability of being hired in permanent positions in Norwegian universities. It's following a very racialized pattern, in that if you're white and Western, like if you come from Germany or Northern Europe, it's more likely, and then the least likely are women from African countries, for instance.
Do you see this as well?
To get the permanent position.
Yeah, also just looking around in what kind of persons are working with me. So definitely, I don't see the in gender differences, but clearly there are just a few and far between the black women in the department, but there are examples. But it's I think it's well, that's I would imagine that in at the HF faculty, humanities, there are more based on kind of the Norwegian language, also the Norwegian culture and so on. And you have, of course, engineering, where you have a lot of international students down at Øya, medicine and health sciences. There is also quite a few. So it's common for in our lunch break to speak English due to having.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't thought so much about it. I have a lot of colleagues now from all over the world, from China, from Pakistan, from everywhere. So I don't see internationalization as a challenge by itself. I feel that people from different cultures are just as inclusive as the Norwegians think about themselves.
But I think this your bias, because what the number says is that black females, you won't find many of those.
No, maybe not. I haven't thought so. I don't. Maybe I'm colorblind or something. I don't think so much about it. But I see that when people get into a milieu, we very often adapt. So I think that.
But that's a key word. I think we very often adapt, and that's also why it's this. There's also this danger of thinking too much about how people look different. Like we can count people based on some categories that we register, and then we tend to also have some ideas about what people are in terms of how they like differences that we can see, and that's not necessarily what represents, for instance, diversity in bringing perspectives into research, for instance. So there's not the NTN, one-to-one relation between social categories.
All right, but let's take a step back here. We're talking quite a lot about hiring, career development, but let's address the more fundamental issue, which is what benefit is it? Like, how is this good for society that we become more diverse? Why is this important to begin with?
I think
that's an easy question, isn't it?
No, but I think regardless of what type of research you do it for society in some way. So, and it makes, like, research doesn't happen in a vacuum. It matters who is part of doing research. And then I'm not saying that it essentially makes a difference, like in solving a math problem. I'm not saying that the gender you have is playing a role necessarily in solving that problem, but we also know that lived experience play a role in what questions you would be interested in raising, how you interpret data, how you think about the potential effects of the results of your research, and so on. So, and I think that's where the importance of bringing different people into research comes, and that's where we also have to discuss these norms and not just make everyone coming in with their different lived experiences and align to this, confirm this norm, because then it doesn't make a difference.
I think that the most important part of it is fairness. I think that people can come from wherever they are, have short hair, long hair, whatever color, whatever education, but it's fairness, and we should have openness for everyone, and give the equal opportunities in academia for everyone.
But I think that the simple answer is that academia should represent the world as it is.
Yeah.
And so the benefit of diversity is that it's representative, as you do in all good research, whether or not it's constructivist or more positivist. You somehow think about representativeness. And that's the same case. So if it exists in the world, it should also be represented in academia. So it's kind of very easy to say that we so much resources that goes into academia, research, all of the benefits that can be derived from that. If that's selected for only a part of the population, of course, that's not a good thing.
Right.
So we need that.
So it's important. But now we have a question from the audience that our audience is hoping that we will also talk about how diversity in applications for research funding.
Yeah.
Any perspectives on this, experiences?
Find the most known professor, put him on the application, and you are increasing your chances. That's my experience.
But what about increasing the diversity? So
that's the way of opening for diversity. You put a front figure. Also you have a group where there are people who have to kind of fulfill all the criteria you need to pass to be considered for funding, and then behind that you can do all of the exciting things.
Bring in all different kinds of people that otherwise might not, if they were at the front of the application, on the top of the application, might not get. Anniken?
I think it's just about having in mind when you make applications that you include women and people from different countries, etc., as a normal thing. It's not extraordinary. We have competent people from everywhere and include them in, and I think that should be something our common mindset. Yeah. It's not something we do to what do you call it when you quick up the bride or something like that?
Brush up the bride.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
brush up the bride.
so. We're talking about who gets to be or part of an application and gets on
And
board
actually gets funding.
and actually gets funding. Yes, I think there are some measures taken by funders, for instance, regarding this gender or representation of women. So there are some hard measures requiring, and then we see that as long as that is what it takes, research groups will make it happen to sort of be able to compete. We don't know if it actually shuffles the informal power in the group as such. We
Right.
don't know that. So there's a lot of stuff there that's interesting. And then I'm also thinking about the content of the research we propose to do. So that's also a way to think about these integrating a diversity of perspectives in the actual research and not keep reproducing like the idea of the universal human.
This is, to my mind, this is kind of ordinary human processes. If it's known for us, we feel more comfortable with it, and we more easily accept
That's
it.
true.
Yeah.
So as long as there is something that you recognize, okay, this I trust, or this is good quality, or some kind of things that you would say in an assessment committee, or if it's for applications, then you can accept more of the diverse part of it. But if it's entirely foreign to you, and you have an application, you know that you will fund 10 projects and you have 150 ones to assess, it's very easy to say, oh, this is difficult, I'm not quite sure what I know about it. What I will do is this one, and it's easier to put on side because you know you have to exclude so many good applications. So that's my practical advice. It's tabloid, but it's still...
And I think you are probably right that young researchers today should do what it takes to sort of be recognized in the systems as not too deviant from the norm. But then what should we do? Those of us who are sort of on the level, who are in assessment committees, I think that's also when you should, or we should at least be encouraging our colleagues also and ourselves, asking ourselves this question.
So
is it simply because I know this name and it's like...
Yeah, and I completely agree, because that's my main point about diversity and thinking in terms of early career. It's obviously that there are are we calling them systematically or institutionalized barriers that you need to be aware of: gender, racism, things like that. But when it comes to academia, there are a lot of things that are not said about the process of getting funding, of getting past the assessment committee for a position, which concerns how people perceive science and what's good science, and the criteria we have made for good science, and those criteria are made from those who came before us, and it's building on those. And it should be changed, and what I try to do is to say that, okay, this is this application fulfill all the criteria for making it a fundable application, but the additional strength of this is that they've added something which is unusual. I must say I experience, of course, this is my bias as well, because it's my view of what's diverse by it. But my experience is that this is not a very good argument. But sometimes I can make that argument, and people agree that yes, it says here that there should be innovation, something new, exciting, and so on, so they can accept it. But it's very difficult to come up with this extremely well, if it's extremely bright and new, innovative idea, then sometimes it gets funded. But it's much more easy to have something very traditional and a small bit of innovation on the side.
What you're saying is that it's easy for us to accept things that are familiar and harder to accept things that are not. But as our society diversifies, if you look, I've been in Norway 20 years now, and just to look, amazing, just to look around, you see in Trondheim, it feels more diverse. It is more diverse. It's much more normal now. But we're almost out of time. I have this one question, if we can get a quick answer to. I don't know with this crowd. Has NTNU considered the experience of employees who are non-white that have Norwegian citizenship? Is this something that you're seeing discrimination, for example, Siri? Is this something you look at?
I think we should look at it, and it's understudied, I would say, and it's not addressed as it should be. We know again, statistically, that second-generation immigrants are less represented. That's the category we count. And then we have indications about experiences of racism. And we don't know enough about what excludes this group. We just know that it keeps reproducing.
All right, real quick, Anniken, the clock is counting down.
I just think it's very good that we now are in a university where we have a lot of action plans and a focus on it. So I'm more optimistic.
Should be part of the action plan, it isn't.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because we have an action plan which we never got to discuss. All right, well, I think I will say thank you very much for a very exciting and lively discussion, Siri, Anniken, Aslak. And of course, thank you to our audience for listening. This is our last science conversation of the season, and we'd really love to hear what you think. So many of you, I hope, all of you are on an email list where you would have gotten a survey. If you've gotten it, fill it out so we know whether we should keep going. And thanks all to participating and watching.